Hey everyone, I never thought my life would take a turn like this. Looking back, maybe things shouldn't have ended the way they did. It all started after a court case. I was just looking to unwind and meet up with some friends at a little dive bar near the courthouse. But the usual crowd wasn't there, so I headed towards the bar. That's when I saw her. This incredible woman with fiery red hair sitting at the bar. A Glock 19 strapped to her hip. She was stunning, but there was this kind of aura around her that made me feel a little intimidated. She noticed me trying to find a seat, and with a quick gesture, she nudged her friend aside, making room for me. I walked over, ordered an IPA, and before I could even say hello, she spoke. "I saw you in court. Lawyer, right?" I gave her a smile and leaned in to hear her over the bar noise. "Yeah, I'm a regular at the courthouse, but my work isn't exactly your run-of-the-mill stuff. I was representing a non-profit today. Pretty light duty for a lawyer like me." She laughed, her eyes bright and knowing. "So, what's your specialty?" she asked, teasingly, but with a hint of seriousness. I looked at her, trying to hide my grin. "My specialty? That's a long story best told over dinner with a beautiful woman." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not easily swayed. "Well, if I'm not that woman, guess I'll never hear it, huh?" "That depends. If you're willing to have dinner with me tonight, you might just find out." Wendy burst out laughing and shook her head. "You're a bit cocky, aren't you? We haven't even exchanged names, and I don't even know who you are. You could be a smooth-talking player, with a girlfriend waiting at home." I shrugged, my eyes twinkling. "I'm totally free. And judging by that Glock 19, I'd say you're a pretty independent lady who likes making her own decisions." Wendy looked at me, her gaze intense. Then, after a moment, she nodded. She stood up, turned to her friends, and said she was leaving. "Have fun, Wendy." One of her colleagues called after her, quickly grabbing their phone to snap a picture of me. At that moment, I was amazed at how easily things were unfolding. Dating wasn't really my forte. I wasn't exactly a heartthrob, and I didn't have exciting stories to tell. My life was work, studying, and sometimes long business trips. My relationships were usually just fleeting kisses and awkward hand-holding. I never felt a deep connection with anyone, and maybe that's why they didn't last. But with Wendy, it was different. She was alluring, strong, and knew exactly who she was. After that night at the bar, we continued to see each other. Wendy took me to a steakhouse nearby. She was a seasoned cop, working towards her detective's badge, and she seemed to love her job, despite the long hours. I, in turn, told her about my legal work, about the times I represented defense companies, helping them navigate government regulations. "If you've ever heard of the military-industrial complex, they're my clients," I said, half joking, half serious. We started getting closer. Wendy began to open up about her own dysfunctional family. Her parents, both of them, had affairs and stayed together out of a sense of obligation. She had to grow up fast to escape that mess. But despite her complex childhood, Wendy never lost her strength and her love for life and her work. Over those dates, I realized I was falling for Wendy. My life had been pretty bland, but with her by my side, everything felt different, exciting. Long quiet evenings with her leaning on me, sometimes weekend mornings spent on the grass watching the sunrise. Wendy was the kind of woman who could talk and laugh about everything, and still hold that mysterious allure. When my lease ran out, I moved in with Wendy. Her place was cozy, and we both felt comfortable starting to talk about the future. But I was still a little nervous. Wendy was different from any woman I had ever met. She was the only woman who made me want to commit. 6 months into our relationship, one night in bed, Wendy turned to me and said, half-jokingly, "I want a husband, a house, and kids. I'm wondering why you haven't applied for the lead role yet." That's when I knew. The next day I bought a ring and proposed. But Wendy surprised me. She didn't accept the ring right away. "Jason, I love you, and I truly want to be with you forever, build a life with you. But I also love my job, the bonds I have with my colleagues. I want to keep being a cop, even when we have a family. It involves long nights, unpredictable hours, and sometimes I'll have to be away from home. I also want to have time with my friends. If you can accept that, if you're not just okay with it but happy to support me, then I'd be thrilled to be your wife and have kids with you. But I don't want any false expectations that will leave you unhappy later, like me not being able to be a stay-at-home wife or mother. I want you, but are you sure you're happy with that kind of life and a wife like me?" I took her hand, smiling. "Wendy, my love, I want to spend the rest of my life with you and I'll happily go wherever you want to go." Wendy trembled, extended her finger for the ring, then pulled me close and kissed me passionately. "Oh, Jason, I'm so lucky to have you. Maybe you're the only one in the world who can love me for who I am. I love you." We decided to have a simple wedding, just our families. I was in my late 30s, Wendy was close to it, and we didn't need a big spectacle. We just wanted a small, intimate ceremony. A year later, we decided it was time to start a family. Wendy stopped taking her birth control, and after just a month, she was pregnant. Wendy chose to keep the pregnancy quiet, but between the morning sickness and the shift in her work schedule, it was hard to hide for long. Her colleagues and boss adapted quickly and offered support, putting her on less demanding assignments. She was assigned to a new task force investigating a child sex trafficking ring in the surrounding counties. The work was primarily office-based, but Wendy would still have to participate in stakeouts. But she was eager about the new assignment and worked closely with the district attorney, James Rodden. The project expanded, and Wendy found herself increasingly engrossed in the work. As Wendy neared her due date, she went on maternity leave. She remained upbeat, exercising lightly and preparing for the arrival of our first child, Paul. The last month of pregnancy was tough, but Wendy endured it with incredible resilience. I decided to work remotely so I could be with her more, and I set up our living room as a mini office. I noticed that Wendy seemed a little bored staying at home, and she often called her colleagues to chat. She'd talk with Lucas, her close partner from the task force, sharing ideas and insights about cases. Then the day Paul was born, everything went smoothly. Wendy named him Jason Jr., or Little Paul, as she affectionately called him. I switched to working full-time from home so I could help her care for Paul. As Wendy started to regain her strength and get back into shape after childbirth, I gave her all the support I could. I cared for the baby, changed diapers, soothed him, and endured his late-night cries. About 4 months later, Wendy started working part-time again. She was excited to be back with her colleagues, tackling challenges at work. She continued to spend time with Paul whenever she could, but when work called, I was the one staying home with him. Life was busy but joyful. We shared household chores, cooking, and occasionally we'd all go out for dinner together. One evening, I noticed Wendy wasn't eating much. When I asked her about it, she said, "It's nothing, I just had a big lunch." "Oh, big lunch? Who did you go with?" "Lucas. He wanted to try a new restaurant, and we ordered too much, so we overdid it." "Just the two of you? Do you guys often have lunch together?" Wendy laughed, looking at me. "Yeah, sometimes we go together if no one else is free. But are you jealous, honey? Don't worry, Lucas is just a friend. I have no intention of replacing you." After that lunch conversation with Lucas, Wendy never mentioned anything about work with him again, although she never hesitated to answer any questions I had and admitted they sometimes had lunch together when no one else was available. Life went on. A few weeks later, my mom called to say my dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital. My dad was doing okay overall, and the initial prognosis was good. Then my mom said my dad had asked if I and little Paul could come see him. I discussed the call with Wendy, making sure she was okay with me taking little Paul on a fairly long trip, and asking if she wanted to come with us. Wendy had too much going on at work, including an official funeral and other scheduled appointments, so she couldn't make it, but she thought I should definitely visit my father. Moreover, she wouldn't be able to look after the baby, and therefore I should take Paul with me, because I could look after him. We discussed logistics and packing. Wendy seemed slightly sad, but also looked forward to some alone time. "I don't worry about me. I'll miss you both terribly, but stay as long as you need to with your parents. Maybe I can take some time off after you return so you can both get some rest after all of this." I left with little Paul the next day. Throughout the trip, I would call Wendy every morning. That was the noisiest time for little Paul, and I would put him on the phone with Wendy as he gurgled and made those sweet sounds only babies could make. Wendy would also call every early evening to check in and talk to Paul before I put him to sleep. Our conversations were short because neither Wendy nor I were talkative, and I had Paul in my arms. But all the conversations ended with me saying, "I love you," and Wendy responding, "I love you more." I ended up staying with my parents for almost a week. It took 2 days for my dad to be able to return home, and then I had to spend time helping my parents when he got back. Moreover, I was not free to travel because my legal work also kept me busy, so staying with my parents was easier than trying to rush back home. Meanwhile, my mom doted on little Paul and helped me take care of him, which allowed me more time to focus on work than I would have if I had been at home. Furthermore, Wendy wasn't pushing us to return, and therefore I stayed where I was. That Friday morning, as usual, I called Wendy while I was at my parents' house, but this time, in the middle of the call, I heard a loud noise from her side, a door slamming shut, then hurried footsteps. Wendy went silent for a moment and then muted the call. After about half a minute, she came back on, speaking quickly. "Something's going down out here. I'll call you back." Before I could even say my usual "I love you," she hung up. I waited for Wendy to call back, but there was nothing. When it was time for my scheduled conference call with a defense company client in France, I had to put off calling her back. This meeting wasn't just any ordinary meeting. They were offering me a position as their new legal director, a challenging role with a hefty salary and numerous benefits. They needed someone like me, someone who understood the law and had a reputation in the field. But the catch was that it was based in France. When they asked if I was interested, Wendy came to mind. She would never give up her job as a cop here to go to France, where she knew nothing and couldn't speak the language. But I wanted to discuss the possibility of working remotely with periodic trips to France. The company agreed to give me more time to think it over. After the meeting, I immediately tried calling Wendy back, but the phone went straight to voicemail. I don't know why, but a feeling of unease gripped me. To get my mind off it, I checked the news, and my life changed in that instant. The news reported that the FBI had arrested James Rodin, a district attorney, for his involvement in a bribery and embezzlement scheme. There were complex ties to foreign investors, even some officials from China. A video clip showed the FBI apprehending Lucas at his home, and in the commotion of the crowd I saw a familiar figure, Wendy. I quickly downloaded the video, replayed it, and scrutinized every frame. There was no mistaking it, it was her. But what was Wendy doing there? And at that time? If she was part of the arresting team, she would have been in uniform, but she wasn't wearing any police attire. Could she have been there before the FBI swooped in? I waited for Wendy's call to explain, but still, there was silence. Finally, late in the afternoon, I got a text from her. "Everything's crazy here because of Lucas's arrest. You're lucky you're not here right now. We'll talk when things are clear. Love you." That message left me with more questions than answers. Why wait until things were clear to talk? And what was I supposed to be grateful for? I returned home with Paul that weekend. Wendy wasn't working and greeted us with hugs and frantic kisses. She filled the evening with a barrage of questions about the trip, how my parents were doing, and every little detail, as if she were trying to hide something. That night, after Paul fell asleep, I decided I had to confront the truth. "Tell me, Wendy, what's going on?" I wasn't going to let her avoid it. "Lucas got arrested. You work with him. You have to tell me what's going on." Wendy wrapped her arms around my face, her eyes locked on mine, filled with a desperate plea. "Honey, I wish I could tell you everything. I really do. But there are ongoing investigations by both the feds and internally, and we're all required not to discuss anything, even with our spouses." I tried to mask my frustration, pushing for answers. "Were you there when Lucas was arrested?" Wendy blinked, worry flashing in her eyes. After a moment of silence, she whispered, "I'm sorry, babe, but I can't say anything right now. I promise I'll tell you everything as soon as I can. I promise." Then she hugged me tight, as if afraid of losing me forever, her eyes welling up, before rushing to the bathroom and slamming the door shut. By the time she came back, dinner was cold, and we ate in silence. Afterward, Wendy took my hand and asked if I'd come to bed with her. I agreed, but warned her, "Wendy, I'll come to bed with you, but don't expect anything from me." Weirdly, Wendy's eyes seemed to hold a glimmer of relief. "I understand, honey. I just want you to hold me. I need to know that I'm still yours, and you're still mine. That's all I need." Despite the swirling thoughts in my head, I couldn't say no. My love for her was huge, and Wendy was my home. We held each other without urgency, without demands. Just peace in that moment. We drifted off like that, in a silent but profound closeness. The next morning, Wendy made breakfast and fed Paul. I watched her, a complex mix of love and doubt flooding through me. Wendy was the mother of my son, the woman I'd trusted and loved with all my heart. But this secret was still there, haunting me. Meanwhile, I decided to keep the job offer in France under wraps. On Sunday night, we went to bed again, without any intimacy. Wendy just lay beside me, her eyes sad but silent. When I asked, she simply replied, "These tears are because I'm so happy to be with you and Paul." The following day, Wendy went to work, and I went back to my usual routine. Late in the afternoon, a call from an unknown number popped up. I generally don't answer unknown numbers, but this time a feeling urged me to pick up. "Mr. Kruger." A woman's voice rang out, serious and urgent. "We've never met, but I have something you'll find extremely useful and important, and I want to share it with you." Confused, I asked, "Who is this? Are you trying to sell me something?" "No, Mr. Kruger. I'm not selling, and I'm not asking for anything from you. I just want you to have this information for the benefit of both of us. But there's a condition: you'll never reveal that you saw this information, and you'll never identify me. Maybe you'll need to show Wendy, but no one else." I hesitated but agreed to meet. We settled on her coming to my house the following day, around lunchtime. This was a dangerous move, but I had no other option if I wanted the truth. That night, Wendy came home earlier than usual, and as soon as she walked in, she mentioned that the task force was being reorganized after Lucas's arrest. I casually remarked that it would be a shame if this situation reduced the pressure on child molesters lurking out there. Wendy remained silent, nodding slightly in agreement but not responding. After putting Paul to bed, Wendy entered the bedroom, unexpectedly dressed in a very seductive nightgown. She came to me, wrapping her arms around my neck and whispering, "I know you have a lot going on, but tonight, I really need you. I want you, a lot. Can we go to bed early?" Despite the heavy feeling in my chest, I couldn't refuse such an invitation. We made love gently, Wendy whispering repeatedly that she was mine, only mine, as if trying to affirm something. These words were strange, as this was the first time she used them, and they kept repeating themselves in the darkness. The next day, with Wendy back at work, I resumed my role as both lawyer and caregiver for Paul. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young woman, dressed in business attire, with a determined look on her face. She introduced herself briefly. "I'm Geraldine. There's no need to mention last names in this case." Without beating around the bush, she asked to use my computer with internet access. Geraldine got straight to the point. "You're probably wondering why I'm here. Frankly, I hate your wife, and I want to hurt her. The most painful way I can think of is to make you hate her too, to make you despise Wendy as much as I do." Geraldine gave me a cold glance before continuing, "I just need you to promise that what I'm about to show you will forever be a secret between us. No one else will know, not even my name or any details. I'll give you some images as proof if you want to confront your wife, but you have to keep your promise. Agreed?" I had no choice. Whatever her reason, it didn't matter. I had to know the truth. "Yes, I promise this is between us." Geraldine then recounted, in a flat, resentful tone, how Wendy had pursued and secured the arrest of her brother in an insurance fraud case, resulting in a lengthy prison sentence. Geraldine believed that Wendy had exaggerated her testimony, turning her brother's reckless act into an unforgivable crime. Ever since, Geraldine had harbored resentment and was determined not to let Wendy get away with it. Currently, she was working as a paralegal for the U.S. Attorney's Office, assisting in the prosecution of Lucas. During the investigation into the relationship between Lucas and foreign powers, the FBI had secretly installed a surveillance device in Lucas's home for a short time, and Geraldine was tasked with reviewing the recordings to remove irrelevant portions. Geraldine looked straight at me and said, "In the recordings, I saw Lucas welcoming a woman, and that woman was your wife. They were intimate, close in a way I never thought possible between your wife and someone like Lucas. When I realized it was Wendy, I knew I had to let you see those scenes. Everything involving Wendy has been uploaded by me to a secret database, and I've scrubbed all originals from government records, as required by the investigation order." My heart raced, unable to distinguish reality from illusion. Can I see those tapes?" Geraldine nodded, her fingers flying over my keyboard to access the secret database. "I'll show you everything. She was at Lucas's place for 3 nights, within 5 days. She clicked on the first file and left the screen for me. The video began playing. Lucas and Wendy were walking into the house with a takeout dinner in a bag. The entryway was somewhat on the edge of the image, but I could see Lucas and Wendy walking in and both taking off their shoes and socks. I guess Lucas had the idea of house shoes. Lucas opened a bottle of wine and poured a glass for Wendy and himself. They raised their glasses and each took a sip. Then Lucas began stroking Wendy's cheek while they talked but too softly for the microphone to pick up their words. Then they separated and Lucas began preparing the takeout dinner. Meanwhile, Wendy sat in one of the armchairs in the living room, pulled out her phone, and made a call. "Hi honey, just calling to check if little Paul is still awake to talk to mommy." Wendy was drinking wine in Lucas's house while calling me and Paul. The call was expected but, Now, it also served to confirm that I was still away and oblivious. After ending the call, as usual, with "I love you more," Wendy left her phone on the table beside her and went back to the dining area. There, they continued to eat their dinner in the manner of any married couple. They ate, drank wine, held hands occasionally, they talked about their day and their plans. After finishing, Wendy grabbed her plate and utensils and went out, presumably to the sink, and Lucas followed. The two disappeared from view and their voices were too soft to understand. But a minute later, the video showed Wendy sitting on Lucas with her legs wrapped around his body and her arms wrapped around his head and neck. They were kissing. Lucas lifted her sitting body from the couch where they both collapsed. My wife and Lucas began taking each other's clothes off. Once they were naked, they lay down on the fake bearskin rug in the middle of the living room. With Lucas lying on his back, Wendy rested her head on Lucas's stomach and began licking Lucas's penis. She held Lucas's specimen in her hand and the light glinted off her engagement and wedding rings was easily recognizable. Occasionally her hand moved up to stroke Lucas, then to his thigh and then back down to the small Lucas. Lucas gently stroked her back. Then Wendy pulled herself up so that the lovers could kiss. Wendy's hand remained on him, and her rings still glinted as they moved up and down the shaft of Lucas. Lucas is kissing Wendy's lips, kissing her neck, kissing her lactating breasts, while gently fingering Wendy. Lucas, pulling Wendy on her back, opened Wendy's legs and began to gently caress. At that point, Lucas picked Wendy up and carried her toward the bedroom and out of view. At this point, the video ends as both the voice and motion detectors are not activated. The next video is the next morning. The video is triggered by my morning call to Wendy. Wendy's phone is ringing on the side table where she left it. After a few rings, Wendy appears and answers the phone. She is naked, clearly not having had time to cover herself. I am watching Wendy talk to me while naked in another man's home. As usual, the final words are "I love you more." Although the video is not clear, I imagine that Wendy still had Lucas's semen running down her thigh as she calmly spoke to her oblivious husband and professed her love. After the call, the video ends again until Wendy and Lucas are dressed, each grabbing a travel coffee cup, and leaving. The last seconds of the clip show Wendy kissing Lucas goodbye. The next clip is actually 2 days later. Geraldine explained that Wendy and Lucas had not gotten together at his house the night before. Day 2 video starts around 4 p.m. with a clip of Lucas preparing dinner. A little after 5 p.m., the doorbell rings and Lucas opens the door to Wendy. They kiss and Wendy again takes off her shoes and socks as Lucas had done before. They go in and out of the video range as they are clearly finishing up dinner together. Then they sit down to eat dinner. Lucas opens a bottle of wine, pours 2 glasses of wine, then raises his glass and says, "To your dreams coming true, Wendy." Wendy clinked her glass against his and responded, "We really are." During dinner, Lucas asked, "What did you do last night?" "After work I went to the pub with some guys. We had a good time, and I even played darts. Then home and rummaged around for some leftover food to eat and think." "Think about what?" "Us. It was a beautiful night and a beautiful morning the last time I was here." This is a very difficult and confusing situation with Jason and little Paul. I have to decide if last night is something I want, and, even if I want it, is this the path we want to take? I need to talk to someone and called my sister. "What did you tell her?" I didn't give her any details and didn't mention that we slept together. But I told her the truth. I met someone I have strong feelings for. I think it's love, but maybe it's just infatuation, and maybe I just want the thrill of playing some dark secret game. I want to find out, but that means a relationship that has the potential to get heated. "Oh, so what did your sister say when you told her you were looking for an affair?" "She likes Jason and always thought he was an attractive target for me. She said I was stupid to even think of going down that rabbit hole that an affair would be. She warned me that cheating was wrong, and if Jason found out, I shouldn't expect any forgiveness or a family. She thinks the risk-reward analysis totally favors against any affair, but then my sister had to admit that she didn't know the strength of my feelings for you or for Jason." "So, after all that, what did you decide?" Wendy almost nonchalantly replies, "I'm here, aren't I?" Hearing the conversation made me more devastated than I expected. What I was about to see wasn't some impulsive act under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or a careless slip-up. This was Wendy acting intentionally and knowingly of the risks and acting based on her own cost-benefit decision. The impact of that decision didn't take long to become clear. After finishing dinner and cleaning up, Lucas led Wendy to the fireplace where he began to light the gas logs. Of course, there would be a fireplace. Lucas reached for Wendy, but Wendy resisted and grabbed her phone. I need to take care of this first. Wendy then called me to talk to little Paul and then had a short conversation with me. I ended the conversation with the usual "I love you," and she replied "love you more." Wendy didn't seem concerned with her sister's warning or talking to her husband and son right before having sex with another man. Wendy put her phone down and sat beside Lucas on the fake bearskin rug in front of the fireplace. He gently kissed Wendy as he began to take her clothes off. The next clip is almost a duplicate of the one from the previous morning. I had called and Wendy had picked up her phone that she left in the living room. This is the call where I had asked if Wendy could come to see my parents so that she could spend some time with them, see her son, and then we could all come back together. Now I know exactly how busy Wendy was when she responded to my invitation with "I'm so sorry, honey, but I have so much going on, and I don't have time for this trip." Her final words were again, "I love you more." However, during the call, Lucas had come over and tried to put his arm around Wendy, but she pushed his arm strongly away and deliberately moved away from him. Lucas looked somewhat stunned. After the call ended, Wendy told Lucas, "What you and I have is something separate from Jason and me. Jason is a good man and a great husband and father to my son. When we are together, it's just you and me. But when I'm with Jason, either physically or on the phone, I am his, and you are not allowed to be disrespectful to him by touching me even if Jason can't see anything. The boundaries of the two relationships can never be crossed." Lucas quickly apologized and promised he would always respect the boundaries Wendy required. They kissed to confirm their agreement, then kissed more and embraced. That woman certainly had her life neatly organized and compartmentalized. The last entry for that morning was Lucas asking if Wendy would come over that night. Wendy would not say, "You hurt me so bad and I need to recover, and besides, I need to rest and think." Then, turning to Lucas, she gave him a sweet smile and said, "But then I thought the best idea might be to not think about it." They then left for work, with Lucas saying, "I love you." Wendy just kissed Lucas and said nothing. Geraldine now plays the clips from the third day. I fast forward through some of the videos as I did with the previous videos. The video begins with Lucas again making dinner together, and as before, Wendy enters the house. They kiss, as Wendy takes off her shoes and socks. Wendy then asks what's for dinner tonight. Lucas grabs Wendy, lifts her up, and carries her to the bearskin rug. "I think we'll start with dessert, then work our way backward." "Mim," Wendy replied as she began to take off Lucas's clothes while he removed Wendy's clothes, and they both collapsed onto the rug. But once on the rug, Wendy pulled Lucas's belt out of his pants, tied it into a loop and began to playfully beat Lucas with the belt. "I'm going to teach you how to starve me. I punish my lovers, that's right. I get hot and aroused and I punish." She continued to playfully beat him while they were both laughing and rolling around on the rug. Wendy flipped Lucas onto his back and straddled him while playfully beating him. "You're so sexy. I'm going to punish you for seducing me," she said between giggles. Lucas rolled her over into missionary position. Wendy wrapped her legs around Lucas and continued to spank his buttocks. Then she switched hands and moved her body, but Wendy kept pushing her body into his, running her hands all over him, and kissing every part of that body. Wendy was making love passionately with Lucas. They whispered to each other and laughed. Their faces showed the absolute satisfaction of both cheaters. That knife kept twisting deeper and deeper into my gut. After a while, they moved away from the rug and quickly ate dinner with a glass of wine. After cleaning up, Wendy was walking around picking up their clothes when Lucas took a pillow from the couch and threw it at Wendy. "Hey, slave, we have time for this later. There are other things to do first." Wendy took the pillow and lay down on the rug and placed the pillow beneath her. With her triangle pointed toward the camera unknowingly, Wendy slowly opened her legs, exposing her genitals to Lucas. "Okay, let's start with step 1. Little Paul is now crying, and I have to change his diaper and feed him his pumped breast milk. Geraldine understands and lingers. Geraldine, I've seen enough. I don't need to see more. You said you'd provide me with some screenshots, and I'll request that." I created some selected screen captures while I was going through that. I just downloaded them to your computer and checked to see if they're working. You have what you need. I hope our paths never cross again, because that would mean trouble for both of us. But if you need anything about this, please contact me, discreetly of course. With that, Geraldine took herself out of my home. I'm holding little Paul and crying silently over the life that has been thrown at me these last few weeks. I need to think this through carefully. This isn't just a fleeting fling. If Wendy had just had some random hookup, even if it was drunken or impulsive, maybe I could still forgive her and see it as a marriage challenge we needed to overcome. But what I saw in the video is a deeper relationship, one that comes with intimacy and genuine affection. The kisses, the loving caresses, the way she looked at Lucas, it all screamed that this wasn't a quick fling, but a real betrayal of my feelings and trust. And that made me sick to my stomach and filled me with rage. As a lawyer, I know I can't let emotions dictate my decisions. I need to be clear-headed and think this through thoroughly, especially for Paul. A divorce would mean the end of our little family, and there's a high chance Wendy would get custody of Paul, as mothers are usually prioritized in custody disputes. Even though I have reasons and even evidence of adultery, if I mess up, I could lose custody of Paul forever. I sat there, trying to look at things logically. First, I needed to ensure that Paul would stay with me. Even if Wendy got custody, I didn't want to be just a weekend visitor. I wanted to be the one raising, protecting, and giving the best to my son. I knew Wendy wouldn't give up custody easily, but I couldn't let someone who betrayed my trust become the one to decide my son's future. At that moment, a plan started forming in my head. It required calculation and a little bit of cunning, but I was willing to do anything to ensure Paul would be with me. The first step was to email the company in France, formally accepting their job offer. I'd make it clear that I wanted to start as soon as possible, as I was in the process of handing over responsibilities at my current firm. I'd also ask the French company to arrange accommodation for me and find a caregiver for Paul, at least initially. Next, I called my mom, asking if she could fly to France to meet me for a few days. She was shocked to hear about my impending divorce from Wendy and my plans to move to France, but when I explained that I needed her help looking after Paul during my initial time there, she promised to get things organized so she could come as soon as possible. The next step was dealing with paperwork. I initiated the process of getting an emergency passport for both Paul and Wendy, making sure everything was legally sound so I could take Paul out of the country if necessary. Then, I scheduled a meeting with my managing partner to discuss the handover of my work, and a call with a trusted family lawyer. I asked the lawyer to look into legal regulations regarding child custody when parents live in different countries, hoping to develop a detailed plan to secure custody of Paul. Meanwhile, I reviewed my finances, paid off all my credit card debt, and opened a checking account solely in my name. This account would help me ensure I had enough finances to be independent after the divorce. I also transferred all my personal and work files to the cloud, preparing for the possibility of needing to leave abruptly. The final step, and the one that caused me the most internal struggle, was lying to Wendy. I never wanted to lie, but now I had no choice. To take Paul out of the country, I needed Wendy to come with me, because simply put, the law doesn't allow a parent to take a child out of the country without the consent of the other parent. Wendy needed to come with me so I could get Paul to safety. This plan wasn't easy, and I knew I'd face many obstacles, but for Paul I was willing. Wendy had betrayed me, but I couldn't let her betrayal destroy my son's life. When Wendy got home, I waited until she settled down, then went straight to the point. Wendy, I need to go to France for work, and I want you and little Paul to come with me. She had a look of surprise and was not very interested. But this time I wouldn't let her easily escape the conversation. Wendy, it seems like we're drifting apart. When I'm away, our calls feel cold and unnatural. I understand that you can't talk about everything, but your silence about Lucas is making me anxious. Maybe a break from here, somewhere foreign with just the three of us, will help us reconnect. Wendy was flustered, having no reason to believe I knew about her secret time with Lucas, but I could feel the anxiety in her eyes. Knowing she was feeling guilty, I hoped she would be willing to do anything to keep me in the circle of trust. A moment of silence, then Wendy softly said, I just received a subpoena to testify before the grand jury in the investigation into Lucas. The hearing is in 10 days. I saw the tension creeping across her face. Testifying is always stressful, but in this situation she was also carrying the worry of concealing her personal relationship with Lucas from the grand jury. I seized the opportunity, turning it to my advantage. Wendy, I'm a lawyer. I think the best thing you can do is get away from here before you testify. Let's go to France for a few days, and then you can come back in time for the hearing. That way you won't have to face the stress around it. It's also a chance for us to spend some time together, for you, for me, and for Paul. After some hesitation, Wendy emailed her boss requesting 4 days off, saying that she needed time to calm down after everything, and promised to be back on time to testify. Over the next few days, Wendy and I packed for our trip, while I also secretly prepared for my plan. At work, I organized meetings with colleagues to hand over my work and arrange finances in preparation for leaving. I also discreetly worked with the divorce lawyer, preparing documents and scheduling the filing immediately after Wendy's testimony. My mother called back, letting me know that my father had ordered her to fly to France to help me. Between nurses and neighbors, my father would have someone to look after him while my mother was temporarily absent. Meanwhile, life with Wendy continued, but the atmosphere between us was heavy. Wendy was like a ghost, silent and brooding all day. We barely talked or interacted much. I didn't ask, but I was sure she was worried about the investigation, wondering what the FBI knew about her relationship with Lucas. She could choose to testify truthfully, hoping that the grand jury's secrecy would keep unwanted things under wraps. But she could also choose to lie under oath, a difficult decision, as it goes against the professional principles she had always held dear. Wendy was certainly tormented by falling into a relationship with someone like Lucas, a man who not only committed crimes, but also had ties to forces hostile to our country. But perhaps deep down, she still had feelings for Lucas, still heartbroken to think that he would spend most of his remaining life behind bars. I couldn't tell if Wendy felt guilty for deceiving me and Paul. But if she did, I guessed she justified it by telling herself that the relationship only existed in the world of Lucas and Wendy, where I was not present. Seeing her sadness, I sometimes felt like pulling her into my arms, telling her everything would be okay, but I couldn't do it. Lies had come between us, and I couldn't pretend everything was fine. Instead, I kept silent, patiently waiting for the day my plan would begin. I had managed to get passports for all three of us, just in time for our trip. The flight to Paris was smooth, and little Paul was quite well behaved, sleeping most of the time. After clearing customs, I rented a car and drove straight to a small hotel in a village outside Paris, where everything had been arranged. It was evening by the time we arrived. Wendy had finished feeding Paul, and the three of us went out for dinner. I secretly wished I could leave Paul behind, so tonight's conversation could be between just the two of us. But Paul was still too young for me to trust anyone to watch him, and luckily he wouldn't understand anything anyway. After dinner, I bought a bottle of wine, some glasses, and then invited Wendy to a quiet corner outside the hotel. When we were both settled, I looked at Wendy intently. It was time to face the truth. Wendy, just before we came to France, I discovered something terrible. Can you tell me how it all started? Wendy looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. She stammered a few words but couldn't form a sentence, seemingly in disbelief at what was happening. Wendy, I know everything about you and Lucas, about the 3 nights you spent at his place. I even know the details, from the deep kisses, the caresses, and even the spanking. I know how you played the role of a masseuse. I sighed, trying to stay calm. But what I don't understand is why. Please be honest with me, because nothing can be worse now. Wendy's face went white. She looked at me, her eyes welling up. It seemed like what I said had made her realize that there was nothing left to hide. She turned away, tears streaming down her face, and then suddenly jumped up and ran into the hotel. I sat still, took a sip of wine, and waited. About 10 minutes later, Wendy came back, sat down beside me, her eyes heavy and full of fear. How did you find out? I can't tell you, but if you want, I can show you pictures of you and Lucas. But does that really matter? The only question I need an answer to is why. Wendy was silent for a moment, then slowly spoke. Her voice hoarse. We've worked together for a long time. Lucas always listened to my ideas and thoughts. We talked about everything, sometimes even joked around. I told you that the two of you went to lunch together occasionally. During those lunches, he would often hold my hand. We talked about work, about life. I still thought I would stop before crossing the line. But then, gradually, I started to admire him, to like him. Lucas made me feel important. And then, one day, we had a big event. We raided a house, got important evidence, and arrested the suspect successfully. I had a hand in that case. When we got back to headquarters, Lucas called me into his office, closed the door, and hugged me to celebrate. Wendy paused slightly, sighed, and continued, as if lost in the memories. He hugged me, and it felt warm. I wrapped my arms around Lucas, and everything just happened. He pulled back, holding me in his arms, and looked into my eyes. I looked back at him. Then he leaned in, and I didn't move away. He kissed me, and I didn't resist. Our lips met, a deep kiss that made me shiver. My heart raced, and then I wasn't myself anymore. I wasn't a wife, I wasn't a mother. At that moment, I was just a woman, captivated by the man in front of me. I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my voice calm. Was this before you went to see Dad? I think it was the day before. I didn't notice anything. Because it didn't involve you and me, Wendy said softly, her voice like a weak justification. Didn't involve me? You think you weren't betraying me? Wendy lowered her head, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't intend to betray you. I genuinely thought it was just a moment that would pass, that it would never happen again. But the feeling was so intense, so right, so natural. The next day, I planned to avoid Lucas, not let myself be alone with him again. And it seems that plan didn't work out. Wendy choked back a sob, then continued, as if accepting that there was nothing left to hide. The next day, we had a funeral for a former police chief. The ceremony lasted until late in the day. Afterward, Lucas and I went to dinner with a few colleagues from a different city. Just dinner, I told myself. But then I saw Lucas, his lips moving, the lips that had kissed me the day before. I knew I had to leave, but my feet seemed glued to the seat. And after dinner, when everyone else had gone, Lucas kissed me again. And then I knew I couldn't stop myself. I went home with him. In that moment, did you think of your husband and son? My voice was hoarse, bitter. Wendy looked down, tears streaming down her face, muttering, I'm ashamed to admit it, but when I was with Lucas, I stopped thinking of myself as a wife or a mother. I was just a woman who wanted to be with her lover. I rationalized everything, saying that life with you and Paul was one world, and Lucas was another world, worlds that had nothing to do with each other. I nodded, bitterly. So I wasn't good enough for you. After Lucas was arrested, I had a lot of time to reflect on what I did with him and why. To say that you were somehow not capable is not entirely true. You're a great husband, a great father, faithful, and always cherish family. I was completely content with our married life. But the safe place with you became the problem. I wasn't comfortable being completely open about my secret desires. You didn't know about them, and therefore you couldn't help me satisfy them. I craved a different feeling, something more intense, more illicit. Lucas gave me the chance to do things I'd never dared to try, as if being with him allowed me to temporarily shed my roles as a cop, a mother, and a wife. With him, I could comfortably be the bad guy. I looked at her, bitterly. So, you actively seduced Lucas? Wendy shook her head, replying, No, I didn't actively seduce him. He was infatuated with me, and he seduced me. Lucas was the leader, and I was just prey in his game. He always made me feel special. Lucas was strong, powerful, and he worked with me. Looking back now, maybe those lunches were the beginning of the seduction. If only I had listened to you when you warned me about those private lunches. But I didn't. I let Lucas slowly invade my time and mind until I couldn't tell where the boundaries were. In the end, I allowed him to take such an important place in my life that being with Lucas seemed to become natural. I sat there, trying to process everything Wendy had just said, not knowing if this was an explanation or a confession. I still couldn't tell. Wendy continued, as if determined not to leave a single secret in this story. I know I caused hurt. So I'm going to tell you everything. I'll answer every question, as honestly as I can. Because I know, if there's any doubt in your heart, you'll never be able to forgive me. I need you to trust me again. I'm willing to accept this shame, just to hope that one day you'll be able to forgive me. I sighed, the frustration and fatigue seemed to be trapped in every word. Maybe the truth is that your feelings for Lucas were much stronger than your feelings for me. Wendy looked at me, shaking her head weakly. No, I don't think so. I love you and Paul very much. That love is truly deep. My feelings for Lucas are completely different. They were intense, instinctive, terrifying, but they didn't affect my love for you and our family. But I understand, that feeling hurt us. How could you think it wouldn't affect me? You did things with Lucas that you've never done with me. You showed a different side of yourself, a side I've never known. You loved Lucas in a way you've never loved me. You gave Lucas something you've never given me. How could you think it wouldn't affect us? Wendy sat there, looking down at her hands. Her lips trembled, as if she had just realized what she had lost and the true betrayal she had committed. Her eyes welled up, and then suddenly she jumped up and ran into the room, slamming the door shut. I followed, finding her locked in the bathroom. I didn't want to make a scene or argue further, so I sat outside, opened my laptop and tried to work, to avoid thinking about the pain that was tormenting me. When I went back to the room, Wendy was already in bed, facing the wall, as if she was asleep, or at least trying to pretend to be. We slept silently in the same room, but neither of us felt the other's presence. The next morning, we woke up early, getting ready for work. Wendy took care of Paul, while I changed clothes to go to my new office. The company had arranged a car to pick me up. The day went on longer than I expected, and when I returned, I found Wendy sitting outside, holding a sleeping Paul in her arms. Her eyes were blank, her face tired, and maybe sad too. I guess she'd been crying all day. "Hi, honey, how was the meeting?" she asked, trying to smile. "Everything's fine. It's just that there's a lot to do." I answered, my voice tinged with a hint of weariness. Wendy said softly, "Paul is full, but I haven't eaten anything. I think we could go out for dinner at a restaurant." I agreed, and after changing clothes, the three of us went out to eat. Sitting in the warm light of the restaurant, I knew I still needed answers that were left hanging. "Wendy, you said that your relationship with Lucas was completely separate from your family, as if you could live two parallel lives. But I think we've never had a serious discussion about the meaning of marriage." Wendy listened, nodding lightly, waiting for me to continue. "For me, marriage is a lifelong commitment where we share everything, our bodies, our souls, everything that belongs to each other. It's a relationship where neither of us has the right to share any part of it with anyone else. Marriage is a partnership, and within it, neither of us is allowed to give any part of this relationship to anyone else." Wendy remained silent, then replied, "Jason, I don't think I took anything away from our relationship to give to Lucas. I only saw him during my own private time, and never when you were around. I've always loved you and never wanted to lose you." I looked at her sternly. "Did you tell Lucas about us? About what we did together?" Wendy lowered her head, softly admitting, "Lucas wanted to know everything. He's the kind of guy who always wants to be superior. But I never told him much. I always said that you made me happy. But you told an outsider about our marriage. You shared secrets of this relationship with someone else, while keeping it a secret from me. So, Wendy, who is your real husband?" Wendy closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Lucas and I kept it a secret. But I didn't tell you because I love you. I knew the truth would hurt you and I didn't want that. I kept this secret for you, just as much as I did for myself." I took a deep breath, bitterly. "You are truly a great wife, Wendy." Wendy bit her lip, as if about to say something, but then she fell silent. I looked at her, heartbroken, unable to forget the images I had seen, her massaging Lucas, playing the spanking game, things she had never considered doing with me. Why, Wendy? Why were those things for Lucas and not for me? Wendy was silent for a while, her eyes glazed over as if trying to find an explanation. "I don't know how to answer you," she sighed. "I told you I wasn't comfortable letting you see the bad side of me. Maybe, deep down, I just assumed that your love for me would never change, that I didn't need to try to keep you. Maybe I felt more comfortable being with Lucas because the deception made me feel freer, no longer having to suppress other aspects of myself. But Jason, if I had the chance, I would do anything for you. You're still the most important thing in my life." I looked deep into her eyes, a feeling of conflicting emotions tearing me apart. "You say you're still important to me, but you still chose Lucas, you still let him invade your life and break our trust. I don't need you to answer right now, but think carefully. If Lucas hadn't been arrested, would you have ended the relationship? And if things had continued, would you have thought about leaving me one day to be with him?" Wendy was silent, her eyes heavy with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Jason, I can't comprehend the pain you must be going through seeing all I have done. I know I crossed every boundary of fidelity, that I did things that are unforgivable. But please understand that I didn't do it to hurt you. It was the rebellious part of me, the part one hid. I know it was stupid and selfish. I let myself go too far. But believe me, that's not the real me." I looked at Wendy, my anger and pain bubbling up, impossible to contain. "But that rebellious Wendy is a part of you." We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us wanting to continue the conversation. When we went back to the room, we both changed clothes and lay down silently on the bed, each on our own side. I tried to read a book to calm my mind, but then Wendy got out of bed, took off her outer jacket, revealing a seductive nightgown. She came to lie beside me, her eyes pleading. "I can't sleep with the lights on," she whispered. "You can keep reading, but I want to be here next to you, just like that. I understood that Wendy was trying to salvage something between us, but I knew that if I gave in at this moment, I'd regret it. I gently pulled her hand away from me and said, "You should get some sleep. I'm going to turn off the lights and go to bed too." Wendy sighed softly and went back to bed, but neither of us got a full night's sleep that night. The next morning, a company driver picked me up, and for the entire day I tried to focus on work to avoid thinking about Wendy. When I returned, I found her sitting outside, holding a sleeping Paul in her arms, her face pale. Her eyes were swollen, as if she had been crying all day. "Hi honey, how was work?" she asked, trying to sound natural. "Everything's fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. After changing clothes, we decided to go out for dinner at a small restaurant nearby. When the bottle of wine was served, Wendy raised her glass and said, "Whether we stay together like I hope, or we go our separate ways if things can't be salvaged, I always hope you'll find peace." I clinked my glass, trying to hold back my emotions. "We'll figure something out." Wendy looked at me, her voice full of hope. "And we'll still be in love, right?" I took a deep breath and replied, "Love is a sacrifice, Wendy. I gave you everything I had. I was willing to do anything for you, but now I'm not sure you're my partner anymore. Yesterday, when you said that what happened with Lucas was just a different world that didn't affect us, I couldn't understand. Love means acting for each other's benefit, not letting others intrude on that love. But you betrayed that love. You chose Lucas over me. How can you say you love me when you took away the most sacred thing in our marriage?" Wendy fell silent, tears streaming down her face. She said through sobs, "I'm sorry, Jason. I made a terrible mistake. I know I hurt you and I've lost your trust. But if you still love me, give me a chance to make things right. I want to come back. I want to love you and Paul like a good wife and mother." I shook my head slightly, my voice calm but heavy. "I forgive you, Wendy. But love is not just a promise or a fleeting feeling. It requires fidelity, respect, and loyalty. You broke all of that when you chose someone else, and our partnership is no longer intact. This love, it can't exist without that foundation. I hope you understand and find peace for yourself. But for me, our marriage is over. There's nothing left to build on." Wendy seemed to have thought a lot that day, preparing for what she was about to say. "Jason, I know you don't have any hope left for us. But I beg you, if this wasn't a restaurant, I'd kneel in front of you right now to beg you to give me another chance. I've been thinking about what I did to you, to this family. I don't know how far I let myself go. Everything I did seemed to be out of my control. It's as if my reason stopped working, and I was swept away by emotions I didn't understand. I know I was selfish and blind. I treated our relationship like two separate worlds. I didn't see the absurdity of that thinking until now. I admit I lost my way, but now I understand. I've realized my mistakes. I've grown from this experience and want to become your real wife." I looked at her, my voice dry. "I understand you're describing something many people call limerence, a crazy infatuation. It can become an uncontrollable obsession with someone, triggering neurological responses that make people only want to immerse themselves deeper in the pleasure. You were truly captivated by your first kiss with Lucas, perhaps because it was wrong, and every time you wanted to go deeper, that feeling was even more stimulating. But Wendy, psychological theories can't erase what I saw. Those images will stay in my head forever, like a haunting memory between us. Is it fair for you and me to continue together with all these wounds?" Wendy held my hand tightly, her voice choked with emotion. "Jason, my love, over time, maybe those images will fade in your mind. We still have our little son, the strongest bond of all. I believe I can become the wife and mother you need." I sighed, shaking my head. Maybe that's true. But looking back, this happened just 2 weeks ago, and if Lucas hadn't been arrested, it would still be happening. I understand you think you've changed, that you've learned something, but should we rely on such a quick change in a person? Love should be something that doesn't demand, but your actions show that your love demands more from me than I can give. Do you think you will be able to continue being a faithful wife for the rest of your life? We returned to the hotel with nothing left to say. The game was over. The next morning I quietly carried out the plan I had arranged beforehand. I woke up early, quickly packed Paul's things, and gently carried him out to the car, so as not to wake Wendy. I took Paul to a different hotel where my mother was waiting. When I arrived, she quickly took the baby from me. After making sure everything was settled, I heard my phone ringing. It was Wendy. She had woken up and realized that Paul and I were no longer in the room. "He's with my mom, Wendy. Don't worry, everything's fine. But you should start packing because you have a flight today." When I returned to the hotel, Wendy immediately asked, her eyes panicked, "Where is he?" "Where's Paul?" "With my mom. He's safe." What did you do?" "I need him, he needs me, Jason." "Wendy, sit down and calm down," I said. "In an hour a car will take you to the airport. You'll go back, but Paul and I will stay here." Wendy looked at me, so shocked she couldn't speak. How long will I be gone?" she stammered. "I'm not coming back. I got a job here and I'm going to settle in France with our son." Wendy trembled, clenching her fists, tears streaming down her face. She cried, her voice breaking, "Jason, you can't do this, he's my son. You can't take him away." "Wendy, listen to me," I took her shoulders, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I don't want to do this, but you broke our marriage, and one of us is going to have to suffer the loss of our child. I've thought this through carefully. It's fairest for me to stay with Paul. The one who caused the hurt shouldn't be the one who benefits from this." Wendy cried out, screaming in despair, No. You can't do this, I'm going to call the police, I'm going to sue you." To prevent Wendy from losing her composure to the point of harming herself, I wrapped my arms around her, trying to help her calm down. Somehow, I had to get her on that flight, and that required gentleness but also firmness. "Wendy," I whispered, "I know this is hard, but you understand there's no other choice. You can call the police, but all they'll see is me, a father to a child who's working legally here, and my son. They'll have no reason to give Paul back to you. You can try to fight for custody through the courts later, but realistically, it won't be easy, especially since I currently have Paul and can start legal proceedings here. Wendy, I don't want to hurt you, but if you force me, I won't hesitate to use what I have, including the video of you and Lucas. He's being investigated by the federal government itself." Wendy was stunned, tears flowing freely, and then she knelt down, her hands clasped around my legs, sobbing, "Please, don't take my son. Please." I sat down on the floor next to her, again holding her in my arms, trying to be as gentle as possible. "Wendy, you're not a bad person. And you're not a bad mother. I don't want to take Paul away from you. You'll always be his mother, and you'll always be able to see him whenever you come back to France. But you have to be responsible for what you did. This is the best way I can think of to keep both of us safe." Wendy rested her head against my chest, her voice breaking. "But how often can I go to France? Paul won't remember me, and I won't be his mother anymore." I took a deep breath. Considering what my mom had advised me, something I wasn't sure I could accept, but maybe now was the time to share it with Wendy. "I don't know if this offer can ease your pain at all, but my mom has a different opinion, and I think you should know it. Do you want to hear it?" Wendy looked up at me, her voice hopeful. "Of course I want to hear it. Anything." I spoke slowly. "My mom doesn't forgive what you did with Lucas, but she thinks that if you truly want to redeem yourself, there's another way. Even though she knows what happened with Lucas was painful and hurtful, she believes that if you truly see that relationship as a foolish mistake and want to make things right, then there's hope for us to rebuild everything. You can leave your job at the police station and move to France permanently, live as a family." Wendy heard every word, her eyes flashing with a flicker of surprise. "We'll live together under the same roof?" "That's right. But you need to understand that living under the same roof doesn't necessarily mean going back to how things were. I don't trust you anymore, and to keep things clear, there will be rules to ensure that you can't take Paul back to America on your own. There will have to be security measures to protect the boy and me too. We'll be more like strangers than partners. But at least Paul will have his mother by his side. Maybe gradually we can find a life closer to normal." Wendy was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "It sounds like I'm going to live under your control, a kind of slave." I kept my voice calm but firm. "You once joked with Lucas that you would be his completely. Now that's the responsibility you have to face. This is the price of betrayal. Neither choice is easy, but you destroyed our partnership, and because of that, the price of mending things won't be easy." Wendy burst into tears again, her voice full of bitterness. "So your solution is to blackmail me to get custody of my son. Did I create this monster, or were you already this cold, Jason?" I shook my head, my voice deepening. "These choices might not be beautiful, but they are necessary. You destroyed our family. I won't let my son lose his father because of your mistake. If one of us has to suffer the pain of loss, it has to be you, the one who created this problem in the first place." Wendy tried to speak again, but I interrupted her. "Wendy, you need to think carefully about these things after you go back to America and finish your testimony. Nothing will happen right now. But remember, If you go with Lucas or any other man during this time, even my mother won't be on your side." Wendy bit her lip, looking at me through her tears. "I promise that the only man in my life will be you and Paul." I nodded slightly, then helped her pack her bags and took her to the car. We stood silently together, knowing that this was the beginning of a complex chapter in our lives, where every decision came with a price, and it wouldn't be easy for anyone.